Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Friday, April 27th, 2018. Time for another show. No idea what happened yesterday. I fell asleep at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and that was that. And I was up. I didn't see anything. I don't know what's going on. The house chaplain's been fired. I know that. That sounds pretty bizarre. And all sorts of weird implications involved in that one. And by all reports, he was forced out by Speaker Ryan, who himself is being forced out, interestingly enough. And apparently over, it's hard to believe that this is the case, but then again, it's hard to believe that anything is the case these days. But apparently forced out over, I guess, some objections raised. I mean, this is the private story of it. Objections raised over one of the prayers that he actually offered during during one opening session of the House. Basically, he said as they were marking up the Republican tax fraud bill, but you and I know it to be a tax fraud. They were marking up the bill, and he gave the most generic, basic prayer of dear God, please, guide our lawmakers so that they can create a law that's fair to all Americans. And they were like, what? Fair to all Americans? You're fired. Of course, the cover story is slightly different. Going back and realizing that looked pretty horrible. I guess they came up with the story that they really wanted, and this is bad too. What they really wanted, Republican members said, was a chaplain who could relate to members of Congress a little more, like maybe somebody who was a family man, like all of the fantastic family men in the Republican conference there, taking naked selfies of themselves, using taxpayer funds to pay off sexual harassment claims. I don't know, bigamists who get their second or their side wives abortions, et cetera, standing up for real American values and the like. But of course, other people have noticed. Well, of course, the only clergy who are family men who would be accepted by the Republican conference, i.e. it would have to be a Christian. Basically, that excludes Catholics, which is a little weird, and especially given that Paul Ryan is a Catholic. But to fire the House chaplain, I guess it's interesting. That's not really any of the church's business, but I'll just say that the Pope should excommunicate him for that, because the Pope listens to me all the time. So I don't see why I shouldn't just boss him around and tell him what to do. But what do I know about this stuff? It's on the front page, or was on the front page anyway. Have we scrolled past it? No, I think it's still on the front page over at Daily Kos. Joan picked up the story, naturally enough. Paul Ryan fires House chaplain, reportedly for being way too Christian. And, wouldn't that be a great reason to get fired? Anyway, that's, let's get to that in just a second. But first, remind you that all the way up in the wilds of Portland, Maine, Bill is listening and starts us off with his morning tweet. Daily Kos Radio is live now. That's what all this noise is about. Fair warning, Kagro X didn't get you so much for today's show. Just a beautiful card. Happy birthday, everybody. Yes, it's only been one day since the purported president of the United States called his favorite morning talk show and ranted for about half an hour, and even baffled the staff of Fox and Friends to the point where they were like, please, you should probably go do some work. And by the way, I understand he tried to stay on the line after that too. No, I'm not busy. Hold on. Don't hang up on me. And they ended with you hang up first. You hang up first. And they couldn't get the guy to hang up and go back to work, which is fine. It's probably better for us as a country than him at the desk, where I assume the button is around, and you want to make sure that he's far away from that. Yes, also a good point tweeted out yesterday by Ronald Klain. who, let's see, can we grab this thing here? General Counsel for Revolution LLC now, by the way, former Ebola czar, you may know him as. But Revolution LLC, that's hard to reconcile. But okay. Anyway, he noted it was, as Trump said yesterday, he was calling in and he was noting that it was Melania's birthday, which was kind of interesting. And we mentioned that yesterday, and they asked, what'd you get her? I didn't get her, so I got a beautiful card. That's what Bill was talking about. But I thought that was sort of an interesting thing. Like, why in the first 5 minutes they didn't say, well, Mr. President, it's Melania's birthday. Why don't you hang up and go say happy birthday? No. I don't want to get off the telephone. I want to complain about stuff I hate on television rather than go say hi, happy birthday. But Ron Klain noting for Melania's birthday, Trump gave her an interview where he admitted he had spent the night in Moscow and that Cohen was his lawyer on the Stormy Daniels matter. Two things previously denied. He says, I can't wait for Mother's Day. So, I don't know what he'll admit to at that point. And yet, whatever. It's a bizarre world. That's what we're dealing with. Back to Paul Ryan and firing the House chaplain. Jones' story on this one begins this way, quote, scare quotes, devout Catholic speaker Paul Ryan has apparently fired House Chaplain Patrick Conroy, whose resignation explicitly says Ryan forced him out. Well, he had to be honest about that, right? As you have requested, it is quoted from his resignation letter, I hereby offer my resignation as the 60th chaplain of the United States House of Representatives. The April 15th letter to Ryan, obtained by The Hill, states, the thinking among Democrats is that Ryan pushed Conroy out, and this is the thinking among Democrats, and we might not know what's going on in Ryan's head. Pushed Conroy out, quote, because Republicans thought he was aligned with Democrats, unquote, according to a senior Democratic aide familiar with the discussion. Now, Jones says Conroy had served as chaplain since 2011, where he has been what he is supposed to be, a Christian, like in the prayer he gave back in November on the first day of the markup of the tax scam bill and gently nudged members to think about the meek. And here's the offending prayer, if indeed that was the reason. May all members, you know how chaplains are, may all members be mindful of the institutions and structures of our great nation, guarantee the opportunities. I read this wrong already. May all members be mindful that the institutions and structures, there we are, of our great nation guarantee the opportunities that have allowed some to achieve great success while others continue to struggle. This is not a direct quote because it then says Conroy said at the time. I doubt that was in the speech. May their efforts these days guarantee that there are not winners and losers under new tax laws, but benefits balanced and shared by all Americans. You lousy Hitler. Obviously too disgusting for Republicans to contemplate. So apparently Conroy, Jones says, was too aligned with Democrats. Maybe because Jesus would be aligned with the Democrats. Ooh, that's a big assumption, but I'll go along with that. Who am I to say? That's how much of a sociopath Paul Ryan is. Now, there's a little button here that says I can read the comments, but you know you're never supposed to read the comments. If we wanted to read the comments, though, we could spend the day over in an entirely different section of Daily Kos, a fun front page war that stems from a story that we didn't get to yesterday, reported by The Intercept, and it's the story of Steny Hoyer, surreptitiously recorded in talking with a putative Democratic candidate for Congress who he essentially wanted to drop out and clear the field for a different candidate. And you know, that always grinds gears and leads to interesting discussion, is one way of putting it, on the front page and elsewhere, and I guess here probably in the radio show too, because, a lot of people have different takes on these things. Lee Fang has his perspective, and I always find him an interesting reporter and like to read his stuff, but I know where he's coming from, and I will say that he's one of the reporters that I enjoy and take with a large grain of salt. when it comes to internal disputes inside the Democratic Party. He's not always wrong by any means. That's awful framing for me to even begin with, but he, like I said, he comes at things from a different perspective. And luckily we have several perspectives to offer here just within reach, either from Lee or pushback at Daily Kos from several people, including our own Chris Reeves and Dana Hooley, formerly of Daily Kos as well, who had an interesting point to make. Lee's article begins, with the headline, as so many articles these days do. Secretly taped audio, that's a red flag, reveals Democratic leadership pressuring progressive to leave race. And that's very often the way it goes. Interestingly here, though, they have illustrated the piece with a video, a cartoon rendering of, I guess, how they view this recording to have gone down. The progressive candidate is appropriately disheveled, shabby chic, shall we say, but he is being addressed by cigar-chomping, literal fat cats, one fat cat, one cigar-chomping other dude with a DCCC badge on, and one guy whose head is a money bag. So you know it's going to be good. Steny Hoyer, the number 2 Democrat in the House of Representatives, has for years been a prolific campaigner on behalf of current and potential members of Congress. It was no surprise then that December found him in Colorado, where the party has hopes of knocking off Republican incumbent Mike Coffman. Before Donald Trump had even been inaugurated, local resistance groups began deluging Coffman's public appearances, pressing him not to repeal the Affordable Care Act and putting him back on his political heels. Levi Tillemann, an author, inventor, and former official with the Obama administration's Energy Department, moved back home to make a run against Coffman. He focused his campaign on clean elections, combating climate change, Medicare for all, free community college, and confronting economic inequality and monopoly power, which doesn't entirely square with former official with the Obama administration, but people are an odd collection sometimes. But hey, here's another one. Another candidate for the nomination, Jason Crow, and you can see how things are setting up here. A corporate lawyer at the powerhouse Colorado firm Holland and Hart and an Army veteran, son of a bitch that he is, meanwhile appeared to have the backing of the Democratic establishment, which the Obama administration obviously is not, though it wasn't explicit. In November, it became clearer as Crow was named by the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee to the party's red to blue list, which the committee specifies is not an endorsement but does carry symbolic weight. With Hoyer in Denver, Tillemann met the minority whip at the Hilton Denver downtown to make the case that the party should stay neutral in the primary and that he had a more plausible path to victory than the same centrism that Coffman had already beaten repeatedly. And there's often a lot of validity in that. Hoyer, however, had his own message he wanted to convey. Tillemann should drop out. In a frank, and that's good, and wide-ranging conversation, Hoyer laid down the law for Tillemann. Well, okay. Figure of speech. The decision, Tillemann was told, had been made long ago. It wasn't personal, Hoyer insisted, and there was nothing uniquely unfair being done to Tillemann, he explained. This is how the party does it everywhere. Of course, many people would say, well, that's the problem. And in some cases, it is quite a problem. In some cases, it's not so awful a problem, but very frequently, well, this is the source of so many arguments. This is, the party shouldn't do it. But then again, it is what parties do. It's just what certain people anyway, hope the party wouldn't do, at least not in this case, unless they want it for somebody they like later on. But okay. Tillemann had heard the argument before from D.C. insiders and local Democratic bigwigs, all of whom had discouraged him from challenging the establishment favorite. The only difference was that for this conversation, the candidate had his phone set to record. Well, that is different. And by the way, if you're wondering how it is that Tillemann had heard the argument before from D.C. insiders and local Democratic bigwigs, well, there are multiple answers, but I remind you once again that one of the answers is This is a former Obama administration official who had to move back to Colorado in order to run for Congress from, I guess, ostensibly the place he's from. I don't know that that's his hometown necessarily, but he found a good opponent, and he moved. Well, fine, you move a district over. I don't care. That doesn't bother me too much. But one of the reasons he might have heard this argument before from D.C. insiders is he was a D.C. insider. Now, not everybody in the Obama administration counts as what we think of traditionally as a D.C. insider, but if you had to move to Washington, D.C. to take care of your job and then move back, and, you probably heard that argument before from the people around you, the crowd with which you were running, in other words, even if you didn't consider yourself a bigwig. But there are other reasons we'll get to later. The secretly taped audio recording, released here for the first time, reveals how senior Democratic officials have worked to crush competitive primaries and steal political resources. I'm sorry. A bit of a Freudian slip there. Steer. Did I say steal? It certainly felt like I said steal political resources, and lots of people feel that way, but steer political resources. I wonder if I said it right the first time. That would be interesting. I need to sit down for some counseling. Steer political resources, money, and other support to hand-picked candidates in key races across the country long before the party publicly announces a preference. The invisible assistance boosts the preferred candidate in fundraising and endorsements, and then that fundraising success and those endorsements are used to justify national party support. Meanwhile, opponents of the party's unspoken pick are driven into paranoia, wondering if they are merely imagining that unseen hands are working against them. They should not imagine it. They are working against them. When you have an opponent in a contest of any kind, there are people working against you. Sometimes they are seen, sometimes they are unseen. Very rarely do they call you and tell you what their plans are, but it's a competitive primary, and you should expect to have to compete there. And anytime you're expected to have to compete for something important, you should probably, it's sad, but you should probably expect that you won't know everything that's going on or everyone who is on your side or not. Hoyer bluntly told Tillman that it wasn't his imagination, and that mobilizing support for one Democratic candidate over another in a primary isn't unusual. Representative Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico, the chair of the DCCC, has a policy that early on we'd try to agree on a candidate who we thought could win the general and give the candidate all the help we could give them, Hoyer told Tillman matter-of-factly. And that does sound like pretty evil as a party goes. You definitely don't want to decide early on anybody that you think could win the general election and help them. But, if you're not the person, then I guess that does end up bothering you to some extent. But hey, I don't know. I don't think I feel like that's such a bad thing, but that puts me in the evil column now. Yeah, I'm for Crow, Hoyer explained. I am for Crow, and I don't know whether I would be, but I'm just saying. I am for Crow because a judgment was made very early on. I didn't know Crow. I didn't participate in a decision. But a decision was made early on by the Colorado delegation, he said, referencing the 3 House Democrats elected from Colorado. So your position is a decision was made very early on before voters had a say, and that's fine because the DCCC knows better than the voters of the 6th Congressional District, and we should line up behind that candidate, asked Tillman during the conversation. That's certainly a consequence of our decision, responded Hoyer. Yeah. Staying out of primaries sounds small d democratic, very intellectual and very interesting, said Hoyer. But if you stay out of primaries and somebody wins the primary who can't possibly win in a general, the Maryland representative said, citing the surprise victory of Democrat Doug Jones over Republican Roy Moore in the Alabama Senate election, I'm not saying you're that person, but staying out of primaries, he argued, is not very smart strategy. And it really isn't. You could do better if you're going to get in primaries, and we might hope for you to choose better or different candidates. But not getting involved in primaries, I would tend to agree, it's not necessarily a very smart strategy. Just leaving things to, it's nice. It is an interesting idea, like he says, small d democratic. Leave it to the local people to make their decisions. Of course, on the other side, on the Republican side, we are seeing that they fairly frequently are nominating or strongly considering nominating local murderers, local Nazis. And I'm not saying Democrats would do the same thing, but I am saying that sometimes even having the local flavor versus what the DCCC has to say doesn't necessarily, I mean, we don't really have any track record that says that leaving the primaries completely open, free, and neutral necessarily provides the strongest candidates. I can't say that getting involved has such a fantastic track record either, but it's kind of a mixed bag in both instances, I would say. Before agreeing to provide the audio, back to the article here, Tillman requested that personal details be withheld, and that's wise. It's quite reasonable and good thought. The Intercept selected the newsworthy aspects of the recording for publication. I don't know if I would necessarily be totally comfortable with that, but I would make the same request. All right, here we go. During the conversation, Hoyer asked Tillman to leave the race multiple times and make way for Crow. You keep saying, I would like you to get out of the race, and of course, that's correct, Hoyer said, adding that he hoped Tillman would refrain from criticizing the party's chosen candidate if he decided to stay in. That sounds like a pretty reasonable request, too. The party, notably, has a poor track record, Lee says, in selecting candidates that can win the general election. Although, again, I mean, without bringing the 2016 presidential primary into it, but I guess you could. But it tends to be the position of people who, in that case, happen to have supported the person who did not win the primary and supported a candidate who stood as essentially as an insurgent against the Democratic, the institutional Democratic Party. That person did lose that race, and their position typically tends to be that the party has a terrible record in selecting candidates that can win the general election. And though it is, of course, true that, the history books record that Hillary Clinton did not win the general election, though we all have our own thoughts about that. It is also true that Bernie Sanders did not. Now, there is the position that Bernie would have won, but he did not, and so that's all I've got for you. Neither Bernie Sanders nor Hillary Clinton won the general election. That being just one example of many, you both lost. So again, coin toss for me. I can't tell you who would be better at winning the general election, but I can tell you who got closer, even if sympathies lay elsewhere along the way. In 2006, the last cycle viewed as a wave midterm election for Democrats, the DCCC famously became heavily involved in Democratic primaries. Of course, with I would also point out here, a very different lineup of personnel at the DCCC and directing the DCCC than there is now. But because the initials remain the same, to hell with it. In that election, just as in 2018, the party attempted to pick moderate, business-friendly veterans while nudging left-leaning candidates out of the election. But some of the party's chosen primary candidates ended up losing, and several candidates viewed as too progressive to win the general in Republican-held districts such as John Hall, Carol Shea Porter, and Jerry McNerney went on to win that election with little to no DCCC support. The suggestion that Tillman might end up being a spoiler like Roy Moore, an extremist with a history of soliciting minors, may seem far-fetched. Sure. Tillman, while studying for his PhD, founded an energy-efficient engine design company, and in 2012 was appointed by President Barack Obama to advise the Energy Department. Though he has positioned himself as a grassroots populist aligned with local resistance activist groups, if anything, he is simultaneously a legacy of the Democratic establishment as the grandson of the late Representative Tom Lantos of California on his mother's side and the grandson of former Colorado Lieutenant Governor Nancy Dick on his father's side. He grew up in a working-class neighborhood of Denver. He also speaks Chinese, Spanish, Portuguese, and Japanese, an asset, he says, for the rapidly diversifying 6th District. It's nice. And it's probably an asset, true. but I would say that's next to. I'd be like, okay, good. That's nice. I don't think I've ever made a voting decision based on that, but okay. But yes, that's another very important point here. You're talking about somebody who was an advisor to the Obama administration, worked in the Obama administration's energy department. I mean, that's nice too. While I was studying for my PhD, I somehow got together cash to found an energy efficient engine design company. I'm sure he hustled for that, but, whatever. And, the whole us against them, establishment versus grassroots thing gets a little hazy when you're the grandson of a longtime Democratic congressman and I guess also the grandson of a former state Colorado lieutenant governor. Those are some credentials. It's nice, but, on some days we hate dynasties and some days we don't, I guess. Depends who the people are, and that's obvious enough. Crow spoke at the 2012 Democratic National Convention to support the repeal of the military's Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. Another grassroots working class activist from out of nowhere speaking at the Democratic Convention. It does happen from time to time, as even Chris Reeves, who argues in support of what the DCCC is doing in general, will tell you. You can make your way to the convention as a regular person from a working class background and all. Interestingly enough, though, I would say one of the things you got to remember about making your way to the Democratic Convention as a working class person with a working class background, that does happen from time to time. In fact, it happens every time. And what's really weird is the number of people who make it there as superdelegates who totally suck and are basically Hitlers and should be gotten rid of because they were, of course, named to the spot because of their leadership of their local union. But hey, never mind that. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and as I had hoped, I've engaged Armando in this one, but we've engaged everybody. There's a lot of people have been reading this story and reacting to it. Let me just I'll get through the end of this section here, and then we'll turn for additional comment to Armando. So I had just mentioned that Crow. You know what? And I just realized as I was on my way out to the and thinking more about the break than anything else. It was Crow who spoke at the Democratic National Convention, not Tillman. So I had gotten that confused there. But Crow spoke at the convention to support the repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. And so, okay, nice. I don't know how he got himself involved in the convention, but probably along the same lines about being a local activist who actually, put in some time and joined the local party organization. I don't know whether he was a delegate or just it was an outside invited speaker. Don't know. There's a linked article here. You could check that out. But at any rate, he previously served on the Colorado Board of Veterans Affairs and advised both the Obama administration and former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper on veterans issues. That will explain some of it. So, by the way, contest here between former Obama administration advisor and former Obama administration advisor. A clear-cut contest of progressive versus conservative, obviously. I have issues with that. Crow's first television advertisement focuses on Kaufman's support for the gun lobby. But conservatives have fired back to note that Crow's law firm lobbies against gun control on behalf of gun manufacturers in Colorado. Crow's work representing corporations accused of misconduct may become a liability.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yes, may become a liability in the campaign, or it may not. Legal filings list Crow's name on lawsuits defending payday lender Western Sky Financial, not fun, and fracking firm Slawson Exploration. But your typical complaints that you can usually lodge against anybody who's done any sort of legal work, though I wish they weren't there. But that's about all. Now, Armando, you wanted to point out some important part of the story that I've glossed over for the purposes of getting through this article.
No,
it's a good one.
It's my reaction to the story when I first read it.
I think a lot of people agree.
There was the
you.
same old, the D-trip, blah, blah, blah. Now, and if you want, I'll give you my thoughts on your larger points about the DCCC intervening.
As many C's as you
But
like.
what jumped out at me about this story is the guy agreed to a private conversation with Steny Hoyer, and he came armed to secretly record the conversation for the purposes of delivering it to the Intercept.
Yes.
That's screwed up.
Yeah.
What kind of person does that?
I guess the grandson of a congressman. I guess.
Grandson of Richard Nixon, maybe. I mean, come on.
No.
What is this?
I don't know.
That's a real character issue.
Yes.
Who is this guy?
I don't
and
know.
How did he come to think that was a good idea?
I
what
don't
kind of judgment
know.
does he have?
This article won't tell us. I mean, because he's
like,
the hero of this article.
No problem. Everybody just goes and records secret conversations that you would sure are going to be private.
Yes, although quite honestly, I'm not certain that Steny Hoyer has any. Well, I mean, he has a problem, I'm sure, with being the subject of a secret recording. Although he'll probably tell you, "Oh, I stand by everything that was in that recording."
I'm sure he would, and the guy could say, "Steady, I'm going to talk to the press about this because I'm really upset about it." And he said, "Be my guest."
Yeah.
What's with this secret recording thing?
I don't know.
And by the way, you said, please keep the private stuff out. You just gave the private personal stuff to the Intercept. They know it now. They may not publish it,
right.
But you just violated a confidence.
Yes. I mean, right at the top, that was kind of like, well, I don't know that I would necessarily be super happy about having the Intercept sort out what the private details were. I would think I would rather have
anybody.
A hand in that, but yeah.
I mean, if it's personal and private, it's personal and private. Once you share it with somebody else, no matter what, it's not right. This is crazy.
It's not a good footing from which to start.
People just gloss that over. It's like,
no, that's a good point.
There's something wrong with this guy.
There is something to. So I certainly question something. So this is not a good starting point necessarily for public service, but
it really isn't. I mean,
I like transparency, yes, but okay.
Under false pretenses, do you think hey, Steny, I'm secretly recording this, so just so you know, he's not saying that.
Right. I switched your coffee with Folgers Crystals. They were more forthcoming.
David, I just thought that was just amazing.
I agree. I'll agree with that. Yes?
On the larger story of whether the DCC, I personally think, all things considered now, the DCCC should formally and really stay out of it, because in this environment, at the very least, this is so divisive. So all it does is stir up nonsense. And what are we talking about? What is the DCCC actually giving this person in the primary?
I don't really.
When I read the article, it was something like $14,000.
Yeah.
All this fuss over $14,000.
I'd like to have $14,000, but I agree. That's not anything.
You're not right.
Yeah, and I'm not running for Congress. Although maybe I will.
$14,000.
No, and it you're not even getting close. They'll laugh at you for $14,000. The point I always come back to when it's about the DCCC, in addition to the fact that that's a rotating cast of characters, and to say, well, in 2006 they did this, and now it's 2018, so, they have the same goals in mind. It's different people, true. But I like to remind everybody, the DCCC is an organization formed for, funded almost entirely by sitting members of Congress elected as Democrats. They fuel it with fundraising that they do on their, what is essentially their only spare time. And Steny Hoyer, what's Steny Hoyer doing in California? Well, he's the party boss. He's come to tell people who can and can't run. Well, but he also comes with $1 million in his pocket to every state of the union and says, here's a bunch of money. I spend my time on the rubber chicken circuit all over the country and have for 40 years so that the rest of you clowns can run for office.
That's a good point. And it's funny. Suppose these same people disbanded the D-Trip and just started an independent super PAC or whatever they would do.
And people have tried.
And they've called it Campaign for America's Future or some hokey dokey name. And they went around doing the same things they're doing. Would that be okay?
Yes.
And if not, why not? Why is our revolution
okay? It is okay.
As opposed to
they're not
Onward
organized.
Together.
But, like the Progressive Congressional Campaign Committee, the PCCC is exactly that. People who said, the DCCC sucks. We'll raise our own money and go do this stuff. And they've done it. And with relative success for where they've started and what they're starting with and what they're working against. And, okay, good.
Yeah, I don't have a moral small d issue with this at all. Everybody gets to be for who they want to be, even if you're an elected official. The only thing that needs to be neutral is the process by which the voting, that the candidate are chosen. That's a primary. This guy in this very article, David, says he asked me to drop out, but if you don't drop out, please don't go negative on our candidate. Which means to say is even Steny Hoyer. What can I do? I mean, I'm asking you to drop out. You say no, I guess you're running. What am I going to do?
But I'm Steny Hoyer. Okay. That's definitely true.
$14,000.
By the way, good point here in the comments from the Warlock, who says, by the way, it's a good thing that no one is recording Armando right now. I'm surreptitiously recording you, though. I think you were aware of this. It's going out on podcast. But I guess I got to put that on the table.
No, but it's funny because think of any conversations you have in confidence.
Yes.
And imagine somebody recording them all the time.
Right. Lordy, what if there were tapes? Well, it's true. And I mean, it's a guy who's come to Colorado to try to address an issue which is sensitive and difficult. And he's coming to deliver a message to you that will be taken badly, but hopefully in an adult fashion. But he's coming to talk about the most sensitive issues of the internal workings of the Democratic Party. And for the good of the Democratic Party, you've recorded it and given it to the newspaper. That is a little odd, don't you think? Like, what is he, a super dem or what? He's the most progressive guy out there. We should have him because he doesn't think that the party should have any, internal confidential strategy.
I personally get the sense that this guy wouldn't have minded the DCC intervening if they had intervened in his behalf.
I think that's the case. I mean, I don't know.
Often. I'm just throwing out.
Right. It could be. I will say this. I scrolled down a little bit more, and one thing about me, I love judging books by their covers. I love to do it. Not supposed to, but a huge pastime for me. And I'm taking a look at a picture here included to illustrate the point. And I don't know, the design eye and the aesthetic eye of the guys at The Intercept who put this article together might not be the sharpest one going, but I think it's illustrative of maybe of what's going on in the primary, that they didn't have a glamour headshot, essentially, something that made Levi Tillman look, like maybe prepared for the run. So they used instead a licensed Getty Images photo from via Bloomberg, and it is a shot of it's captioned here, entrepreneur, which is always a question mark for me. Entrepreneur, what do you do for a living? Entrepreneur Levi Tillman speaking at the Bloomberg New Energy Finance Future of Energy Summit in New York in April of 2016, which is a good thing for entrepreneurs to do, to be sure. And of course, I had read while working on his PhD, had founded a energy efficient engine company of some kind, which is also a good thing to do. But raised questions in my mind. Like, that's a sort of a partial explanation for what happened. Like, if I know a couple of people who, came from working class neighborhoods, as the article says, Levi Tillman did. And
his grandfather was Tom Lantos.
Yeah.
His grandmother was the lieutenant governor of Colorado. Give me a break.
Right. Well, Amy Carter went to public school. So, like we said, people live in working class neighborhoods for reasons sometimes. And, sometimes it's because that's where they can afford to live. And sometimes it's because you come from a political family and that's where your base is. Whatever. But, and I guess if you found a company, you're going to find yourself at the Bloomberg New Energy Finance Future of Energy Summit in New York, wearing French cuffs, by the way. I'll just point out it's a nice suit and nice shirt he's wearing there. And you're in the business of drumming up money from venture capitalists, which I think, by the way, usually suck in The Intercept. They're usually horrible people. But this one is a good one because reasons. He's got some policy positions that I don't know about, granted, and he might be a fantastic guy. I might even vote for him. Although I would say I'm a little put off by the recording thing and your lack of understanding of the way things, actually work. Not because they work that way, they're good, but because, I'm more sympathetic just personally to the argument that the DCCC is an organization of incumbent Democratic members of Congress, and you shouldn't look to them for grassroots activity. That's not what they do, generally speaking. And although your judgment may, in fact, be better than theirs, they do what they do, and you should do what you do. And be a PCCC. I mean, I don't often agree with their endorsements, but I totally agree with what they've done for themselves. To hell with those guys. We'll do it ourselves. Beautiful.
Yeah,
I mean,
and you make a great point that at least in this election, there's 193 races
and
that they have a favored candidate, the incumbent, primary or no.
Yeah.
So you start with that premise. Half the races are going to involve incumbents for the Democrats, and that means the D-Trip has a horse in the race from the word go.
Yes, it is a club organized for the retention of Democratic seats and hopefully to gain some new ones. And that's where the game happens. But, members of Congress are going to be looking, like everything, they're going to be looking for people who are like them, essentially. Why? Well, that's the formula, and they think that that's the only way to win. They won that way. They are those people. That's what they're doing. They'll be looking for people. I won this way, so I think you could win this way. Well, you don't know anything about my district. That's true. But, I mean, just generally speaking, I think that being more or less middle of the road and raising a crap ton of money is a great strategy. Well, sometimes you lose. Yeah, sometimes I lose. I mean, if I didn't, I'd be speaking to you as Speaker of the House, Steny Hoyer would say. But I'm not, and it would be 435 Democrats and 0 Republicans. But occasionally we do lose. We miss the mark from time to time.
Yeah, I don't think they're particularly good at it myself, but they have every right to do it. There's no moral objection to what they're doing, in my view. I just don't understand that part of it. I think it's counterproductive at this point, but that's, who cares? Go win. Here's the thing that I would have liked to have seen. All right, you got that whoever you want. I'm going to beat him.
Yeah.
I'm going to go raise my money. I'm going to get that grassroots behind me, and I'm going to go beat your guy. And you're going to come running to me and support me in the general election.
And they will.
Exactly.
So
that's the way it works. You got to go win. Barack Obama didn't care about the establishment. He went out and won.
Mm-hmm. That is true.
That's how you take over the party. You win the primary.
Yeah.
You don't whine about it in the Intercept. That's the problem I have with this entire genre.
At the very least, you do. I mean, we'll go. Hopefully, I'll get through this thing. We'll get to Chris Reeves' response to it.
Oh yeah, let me hang up and let you go to Chris. I just wanted to make that first point.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Well, I've recorded you doing it, so if necessary, I can replay it for everybody. Hello, Intercept. I've got a hot one for you. All right, let's see. Where I left off at the beginning of this next section here. In races in Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Texas, Nebraska, California, and beyond, Progressive candidates are finding that the DCCC has mobilized support for moderate candidates with access to early campaign cash at the expense of progressives. As we've reported, many first-time candidates are told by the DCCC that before they can even be considered, they have to perform the Rolodex test to show they can raise $250,000 or more from the contact list on their phone, which I guess is offered up as the evils of political money, but is also viewed as, well, if you can raise $250,000, we will consider you to have enough juice in the district to get something done. Like, honestly, to sit there and say, well, big money coming, corporate money coming in for my opponent and da-da-da, and I could be better and you don't know my district. All right, show me you know your district. Well, we don't have as much money, but we could raise it from the grassroots. We don't need these corporate money or PAC money. Okay, all right, I mean, go get it. It costs about $1 million to run for Congress anywhere these days. And if you are anywhere near a major market, that's not nearly enough. $1 million will get you gloriously thumped by an incumbent. Absolutely. You'll get trounced in most instances. Unless, of course, they are a Republican, in which case there's a 50% chance that they are, photographed with another someone not their spouse or partner, let's say, or whatever. Or they're using taxpayer dollars to pay for such things. It's a pretty good chance that you'll be able to beat them, but not with $1 million, you won't. So they say, evil bastards that they are. Well, I'll tell you what, if you can make it on small donations and grassroots, if you can raise a quarter of that, a quarter of what you need to get your ass kicked, we'll consider you as a serious person. What? Oh, man, my ideas are so progressive. I know. And there are lots of progressive people who support you over who we would choose. So you can demonstrate that by raising $250,000. No, I can't. And it's very hard to do. It's very hard to do. It's impossible for a lot of these people, and they end up getting shut out of the process. But then maybe you were not going to make it in the first place. If it was just you and another person on the ballot contesting it, 1 versus 1, there's a possibility that you'd get a substantial amount of the vote because people get to the voting booth in the primary and say, I don't know, what the hell. There's about 10 people in the district who know what the hell's going on and who's for real and have met you and have real reason to like you and prefer you for good reasons over the other person, as opposed to, well, I know about this person, I don't know about that person, or I've heard about this person and heard about that one. Low turnout situations, most primaries are, and very often it's only the party faithful who come there with any real ideas about what they're doing. But even so, if it's a 2-person primary, even a 3-person primary, somebody comes away having really, honestly, in hindsight, in many cases, you look at them and say, you've done jack squat to get your campaign off the ground. I mean, you raised a lot of money in terms of, if I had that would be a lot of money. You raised, maybe you raised $250,000 in your entire race. And you come away and you're like, I did really well. I got 45% of the vote. I'm within striking distance. I was just this far, and not that many people voted in the primary. I mean, a couple thousand votes, a few more outreach events, a few more mailers, and I might be the Democratic nominee. Once you're the Democratic nominee, I have a 50-50 shot in some districts at becoming a member of Congress. I was this close. But in reality, you were light years away because 45% of the vote in a low turnout primary is, nothing to be that thrilled about. It looks good numbers wise, but, what if 80, 90% of the people who cast votes for you were like, I don't know, what the hell, right? Or I'm a progressive guy and this is a guy who said he was a progressive and the other guy is a lawyer and he has corporate clients, so blah, 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 and they cast the vote. Not really knowing a great deal about either of you, and it may turn out that, if they had gone to the debate or something, or whatever, and really listened in on things, they might have decided, well, maybe the other guy is relatively progressive as well. He works as a lawyer. I wish he didn't. I wish he had the money somehow, whatever, to found a efficient energy company while he was a PhD candidate from a working class neighborhood who was grandson of a congressman and grandson of a lieutenant governor, however that happens to work out. But, people can be congressmen and poor. It does happen. But, I have my doubts about how authoritatively one can state that netting 45% of the vote in a two-person primary means you were that close. I mean, I think back to the fact that Rick Santorum considers himself to have been basically nearly president, because in the 2012 primaries, he says, this is how he calls it, he says, I came in second in the primaries. Mitt Romney was the eventual nominee, but I was a close second. And you weren't. You were just the last person to drop out. But you never were close to getting the nomination, let alone close to winning the general election. But if I had been nominated, then I would have netted 45% of the national vote, or whatever it was that Mitt Romney came away with. And again, it's like the voting at that point is tribal. They don't care about you. If you had come in first, as you put it, in the primaries, you also would have gotten some percentage of the vote that would have made you look and feel like a very important person nationally, if the nation being your district at that point. But in reality, you're a very forgettable person, and that's just the reality of it. And that could be the reality of it in any congressional district too. I'll continue on here in February, mostly for the sake of getting you the background from which the rebuttals are offered. In February, the DCCC made the unusual move to release opposition research, which he defines here as the term of art for political dirt, somewhat true, against activist Laura Moser, who the party viewed as too liberal to win the 7th Congressional District of Texas, a Houston area seat. The strategy, however, appeared to backfire, as it sometimes does. Moser placed second in the Texas Democratic primary, meaning she'll have a shot at the nomination in the May 22nd runoff. Another person who came in second and thinks they're almost home, but at least here you get another shot at it, and there's a realistic reason to believe that you could come out ahead. Tillman says the decision to record the conversation, here's some answers, came after months of hints that party officials did not want him as the candidate. That doesn't really excuse anything at all. Though he notified the party of his intention to run, he had trouble gaining an audience with senior DCCC officials who owe you nothing. Obtaining polling data promised by the DCCC, well, if they promise it, they should deliver it. Or even gaining access to the resumes of Democratic campaign staff, which is a service that the DCCC provides, and, whatever. Or you could, for instance, look around in Colorado. You say you have your finger on the pulse of the district, find some people who agree, and get them to run your campaign. The party continued to promise neutrality, which is maybe a problem, while inviting only Crow to a candidate training seminar, Tillman alleges. In February of last year, Tillman reached out over email to DCCC officials as he explored a bid and maintained contact with the party staff through the launch of his campaign. He says he was continually stonewalled as he sought candidate resources. Nearly 6 months after the initial contact, with Tillman's internal complaints growing more forceful, the party committee offered some perfunctory assistance in exchange for access to details about campaign financials and organizing. What horse are we looking to help out here? Tell us a little bit about how you're doing? No. The offer came after a heated exchange between Tillman and a DCCC official at a campaign event in which Tillman argued that the party was more interested in boosting Crow than beating Kaufman. While the DCCC still promised neutrality, publicly disclosed campaign donations confirmed Tillman's suspicions. In June of 2017, a political action committee controlled by Lujan, the DCCC chair, donated $1,000 to Crow. Guy prefers Crow. What are you going to do? That month, PACs controlled by Hoyer also donated 2 checks for a combined total of $2,000 to Crow. He came and he told you on tape he prefers Crow. I don't know what to tell you about that. We were put in a situation time and time again where what was communicated to us behind closed doors was communicated to the public, and what was communicated to the public was at odds, says Tillman of his decision to tape the conversation with Hoyer. The breach of personal decorum, oh my, Tillman adds, was much less important than the fundamental principle at stake in our democracy in 2018. Gentlemen, I will not stand here and listen to you badmouth the United States of America. I mean, that was essentially what that speech there was. The guy just said here's the horrible contradiction between what was publicly promised and what was privately delivered. The DCCC said, we will maintain neutrality. And the DCCC, up to this point, it appears, didn't give him money, didn't give Crow money. Lujan, who is the DCCC chair, personally donated a PAC money to Crow, not the DCCC, but Lujan's leadership PAC. Hoyer's leadership PAC gave money to Crow. These two guys prefer Crow for whatever reason. And yes, they will weigh heavily at the DCCC, but the DCCC is always, and never could ever possibly not be always directed by the current incumbent Democratic members of Congress. That's the members of the club. When they prefer somebody privately, they will perhaps weigh on the DCCC as an institution later on to also prefer that person, but the fact that, the constituent members of the DCCC personally gave money from their leadership PACs to somebody, it is what it is. I mean, that may indicate that the DCCC will eventually come down on their side. It almost certainly does indicate that, but it's just not impermissible, and it's not out of bounds. And it doesn't describe what Tillman says it describes. And so it also isn't a particularly good excuse for the violation of personal decorum, as he puts it, in taping Hoyer. All right, we're up to another break here. Mariel Saez, a spokesperson for Hoyer, by the way, said that we do not comment on private meetings. Mr. Hoyer supports Crow and donated to him last year, but he hasn't engaged in the race since then. Crow did not respond to a request for comment, and the DCCC declined to comment. That gets us on to the next section, and that much closer to getting to more discussion about it and more rebuttal of the piece soon. Coming soon, I swear. I promise, like the DCCC. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just a short 1-minute break at the top of the hour to catch our breath and to dive back into the Intercept article, which we are actually plowing through. And I know, I feel like I'm giving it something I want to see rebutted a little bit too much time, but that's probably because I'm doing the rebutting instead of letting Chris Reeves do it. But we'll get to that yet. I don't know. I feel like I want to give a full airing to all these things. And I don't know if Chris gets at all of these points. And you know how I read articles. I can't just read them straight through. But we'll give it a shot one more time. But the dynamics described in the audio tape and by Tillman resonated with other former candidates in the district and probably all over the country. This does happen everywhere. The party did not give me the resources that they gave Jason Crow, says David Aristad, an attorney who had been running for the nomination in the 6th District. Aristad dropped out of the race in March and endorsed Crow. It was the D-trip. I was given extensive promises in March of last year that they would not do anything to favor one candidate over another, that they had learned from the mistakes made during the Bernie-Hillary fallout, and that they would do everything the same for all of the candidates, said Aristad. But they made polling data available to Crow that they did not make available to me. They made other resources available to Crow that they did not make available to me, such as email lists for fundraising purposes. Here, I guess I'll say only this. You shouldn't be making those promises if you don't intend to deliver on them, but I am not positive that those were made because those conversations weren't recorded, and I do have some doubt about whether or not they in fact made such promises or whether you understood them to have been made but misunderstood. Sometimes they say, well, once a front runner emerges, whoever the front runner actually is at some point, and they'll lean on things in order to make sure that their preferred person becomes the front runner because that's what people would ordinarily do. But yeah, there's not going to be any real neutrality. And honestly, at this point, this is like the 400 millionth cycle in a row that this has happened. And I guess I'll say this. It distresses me to some extent though, I can forgive. I'm a generous guy that way. It distresses me that people who think of themselves as this close to being able to serve in Congress consistently, year after year, from every district in the country, find themselves shocked that the DCCC isn't an organization that comes in and says, you're a smart person. Here's $1 million to start with. And then $5 million later, go beat that guy because we want that guy out of office. We don't have the money to be doing that, and we don't have who has the resources, even in a slow year where there aren't 500 Democrats filing for office in every district to run for Congress, to figure out which one of you is really not a complete moron, which one of you is not a grifter, which one of you is just like somebody ought to do something, and I don't know, I disagree about the don't ask, don't tell repeal. So I'm going to go run for Congress. That's all good, but it's not the same thing as really being qualified to do this sort of thing. And quite honestly, if you haven't at this point in your career, and you're not really anywhere in your political career if you're in this position, but if you're going to run for Congress and you have zero idea, after year in, year out, seeing the same thing happen over and over again, that the DCCC is not going to come and spoon feed you all the way to Congress. And in fact, they might screw you terribly. If you haven't figured that out, heard about it, organized against it, by the time you're running for Congress, I don't want you. To be honest, if you fall into the position, fantastic. I'll back you, whatever. I'll be tribal when November comes if necessary. But if you haven't figured out what's really going on here yet, and you're going to be another one who's shocked to find out there's favoritism happening here in this organization of people, and very few of them at that, then I don't know what to tell you. If you don't have a finger on the pulse of your district for real, and by which I mean actual contact and connection with people, not, I don't know, I know a couple of people, or I once went to a Democratic organizing committee thingy sort of thing, or I went to somebody's fundraiser, or I'm an attorney, and by God, I think the Constitution is being misinterpreted. It's not enough. It's not enough. Steny Hoyer, at this point, what does he know about anything? Walk any district, honestly, with Steny Hoyer. Walk his district with him. You don't get anywhere. You don't walk very far because people are stopping all over the place. Everybody knows Steny Hoyer. They don't all love him, but everybody knows Steny Hoyer. And quite honestly, walk any district, if he goes to work the political ropes in your district to raise money for you or for anybody else, and you go to a Democratic event and all the local Dems come out, everybody knows Steny Hoyer. Everybody's there to know you, to get to know you, but they're there to shake your hand, meet you. What the f is this guy all about? Oh, Steny Hoyer. Sometimes they hate him. Steny Hoyer. But everybody knows Steny Hoyer. Why? Steny Hoyer has busted his hump for 50 years in Democratic circles. You? Not so much. You're an attorney. You started an engine company. Aces. Fantastic. Terrific. Where's your network? Who knows you in the neighborhood? If you go to the farmer's market, do people stop you and say, need your help on something? Or do they say, schmuck next to me took the last bunch of carrots. Don't know who that guy is. Right? I mean, that's where I live. That's where I go. People don't know me anywhere. And I don't reach out to know them because I'm not running for Congress. And I'm not going to do it because I'm not that kind of person. It takes a very special kind of person to honestly establish a serious network of support in a locality. And 90% of the incumbent members of Congress do not have that. It's a very, very rare trait. Most of them are Republicans and they're candidates in a box. Democrats, to the extent that they don't run candidacies from a box, do have a little bit better of a base and a little bit better of an understanding. Longtime incumbents, of course, with more time to practice, more so than newer members of Congress. But even them, they don't always, they're not recognized everywhere they go necessarily. It's a rare talent. And so he's speaking from a place of authority in that sense. I know what it takes. You don't. I could teach you, but it really takes decades to figure it out by yourself. All right. So anyway, they're not riding to the rescue and parachuting in supplies in order for you to run a campaign in a box. But they told me they would give me polling. They told me that they would give me email lists. They told me they might give me even money or lists of people to hire for my campaign. You're supposed to find all of that yourself. You want the box? Fine. We're giving it to Crow. Yeah. And much luck may it bring him. This is all we can do. We got essentially 3 losers running for Congress here who haven't done any of the footwork. One of them seems to have more access to more money and has a resume that at first glance, and that's the only glance most of the voters in the district are going to give him, put together a resume that we think, for whatever reason, works fine in this particular district. I'm a veteran. Who cares, right? You know, we've got plenty of diaries, and there's a diary the other day asking, do we really need any more members of Congress to be veterans? It's a fair question. Good question. Dangerous question to ask in public because the people will point at you and say, why don't you support the troops? I get that. It's an instinctive thing, and it's dangerous to, come out in public and question. But in reality, intellectually, it does need to be questioned. But, what else have you got? Well, I am an attorney. Really? Wow. An attorney in Congress? You're kidding. Now, on the other point, like Tillman could say, I started a energy-efficient engine company. That is something. I don't know that it's good for Congress. Maybe now that I think about it, it's interesting. We want to have different opinions, different approaches and everything. That's a good one. On the other hand, attorney, not an awful background, quite honestly, for writing laws. Because what do you do as an attorney? You're a lawyer, right? Okay. That makes some good sense to me. But I like the idea. It's different. Energy efficient engine company. Tell me more about it. How did you start that? Well, I went to some rich people and I said, give me money, and I started a company, and, so where would I find your engines? They would be in what? I don't know. Nothing that you would have, probably. Or maybe we never really got off the ground and I left to go be an advisor to the Obama administration. I don't know. How successful is the engine company? I would like to look that up. It's a good question. Don't have, we need an 18-hour program for that. But you can see, for most people, most voters who were not going to be engaged in this sort of thing, yeah, there's a certain resume that looks like, what the hell, I'll vote for that guy. And it's terrible, but the fault there, I think, lies outside of Steny Hoyer necessarily, I would say. But he's the bad guy in all this. Gabriel MacArthur, to return to the article, another former candidate for the 6th District, and there are many because people have been running for Congress from Colorado for, 100 and something years, says the DCCC never contacted him, even though he was the first candidate to enter the race. I mean, like there's a Colorado desk and the phone rings. Ring, ring. Well, hello. What's new? What do you say there out in Colorado? What do you got for me? A candidate has entered the race. Oh, you don't say. What's his name? Gabriel MacArthur. Have you heard about him? I got a horse right here. How do you, nobody ever called me, even though one day I said, dag nabbit, I'm running for Congress. And then I went to the farmer's market and the guy said, schmuck, you took the last batch of carrots. Wow. I'm getting agitated about this. Yes, but I also, I'm a candidate for Congress. How do you like that? Give me the carrots and I'll support you. I was the first candidate to enter the race. What does that even mean? To who? Who did you say anything to? Maybe you had a press conference. 6 people showed up and the DCCC didn't call? He says the party exercises influence not just over candidate selection, but how political money and media coverage operates in the state. MacArthur says he had the most detailed policies on his campaign website, but could never gain serious media coverage for his race. Time out just for a second to put myself in the suit here. I'm going to put myself in the shoes of the person who can't stand establishment Dems and Hillary Clinton, and Bernie would have won. P.S. MacArthur had the most detailed policies on his campaign website. Time out. Get in the time machine. Roll me back to 2016. Hillary Clinton says she has the most detailed policies on her campaign website. Who cares? Campaign in Wisconsin. Why didn't you do that? Don't you know? People don't care about policies on your website. Connect to people. Yeah. Oh, but for this, well, proof is in the pudding now. He had detailed campaign policies on his website. Well, apparently he could never gain serious media coverage for his race. And, that does happen. You have great campaign positions on your website and the media doesn't care. That is bad news. While Crow, for much of last year, had no issues page on his campaign website, MacArthur noted that the establishment favorite appeared to easily win endorsement after endorsement from local liberal groups and politicians, along with fawning coverage from local media. The guy tapped into a network and he worked it. Was it unfair that should they have held out for a better candidate? Maybe. But a guy made a connection and then he used it to win endorsements, which is kind of what running for office is about. Jason Crow has been hoisted up as the chosen candidate the entire time. The party officers say we need centrists to win against Mike Kaufman. That's just the way it is, says MacArthur, a former Bernie Sanders delegate to the 2016 Democratic National Convention. Elite bastard made it all the way to the National Convention. Or whatever. But he did it in a cool way, you see. Democratic consultants, MacArthur says, have told him to focus more on fundraising than publicizing his policy agenda. The money isn't the real problem. The problem is that the Democrats lack any real agenda, says MacArthur. Maybe. Although, it is known to help you win money. And if the people who can unlock the network that help you become the next Jason Crow are looking at money, then maybe you need to raise some. Well, an agenda would help. That is true. I like that. Substantive issues are fantastic. But it's also kind of a known thing that there has to be money available and being raised in order to amplify the policy positions. And if you haven't figured that out, then you haven't figured things out. When the DCCC publicly added Crow to its red to blue list of frontline candidates in November, the move further embittered local Colorado Democrats who had been assured the party was remaining neutral in the primary. State Party Chair Morgan Carroll, the Democratic nominee in the 6th District in 2016, wrote on Facebook, everybody's been nominated in this place, I guess. The DCCC verbally said they would be neutral and in practice just endorsed one of the candidates in CD6. Yeah, they do that from time to time. The suburban district is being widely watched as one of the most important seats Democrats need to flip to regain the majority. Obama won the district in 2012 by 5 percentage points, and Hillary Clinton won it by 9% in 2016. Here's my question. In the Democratic primary in the 2008 Democratic presidential primary, who won that district? That would be an interesting question. The incumbent, Kaufman, has proved resilient, however, winning crossover votes by projecting a moderate image, which might naturally lead people at the DCCC to think that moderates win there. He defeated Democratic challengers in the last 2 election cycles by a wide margin. Hoyer has for years been a mainstay of House Democratic leadership, tantalizingly close to the speakership. Soon after being elected to Congress in 1981, he became a protege of then-Representative Tony Coelho of California, a business-friendly lawmaker who had just become chair of the DCCC. Coelho famously transformed the DCCC into the big money operation it is today, rebuking the Democratic Party's long-standing alliance with labor unions and activists in favor of raising millions of dollars from corporate lobbyists. And I think that conflates things, the situation with the Democratic National Committee considerably more than it should. But okay, under Coelho, one DCCC brochure assured donors, quote, courteous and direct access to Democratic lawmakers. The DCCC encouraged candidates to focus on raising cash from corporate PACs and building relationships with business executives as the easiest path to office. Of course, it was 1980-something, and that actually probably worked. Coelho resigned in 1989 following an ethics scandal, but not before giving a boost to Hoyer, who's obviously also just as evil because he stood near him, his lieutenant, who was quickly rising through the ranks of leadership. Hoyer, exploiting his own role as the caucus point person for K Street, won election as House Democratic Whip in 2002. According to reports and roll call in the Washington Post, Hoyer regularly invites corporate lobbyists for weekly lunches with the caucus and helps to headline private donor retreats for the party. In other words, he helps raise money for other candidates. But it's corporate money, and that's sad. During the 2006 midterms, and it is sad, he worked closely with the DCCC to raise prodigious sums of corporate PAC cash for party election efforts, further cementing his role as a power player in the party. And by the way, it would be very interesting. What if he showed up and parachuted money in from these corporate PACs into what's his name's account there. If it was not Jason Crow, but Gabriel MacArthur or Levi Tillman or something like that, then the DCCC finally came through for me. But you have to give it back. It's corporate money. Next time. Okay. For the 2018 midterm cycle, the party has not only courted moderate Democrats and formed a renewed partnership with the conservative Blue Dog Caucus for candidate recruitment, but has discouraged candidates from embracing populist ideas such as single-payer health care. For Tillman, however, the party's closeness with the corporate elite is the very reason why the DCCC continues to lose general elections. And it's a hard thing to say, but because they're also winning 190-something general elections, but okay. They squash progressive candidates, and I think they probably do, by and large. But I will say this, progressive candidates very often arrive at the starting line with 2 gunshot wounds to their feet. That does happen. I'm going to raise money in 50-cent increments from the people of this district who don't know me from Adam. They destroy the diversity of ideas in their caucus. They keep ideas like Medicare for all, free community college, or impeaching Donald Trump from having a significant role in the national conversation, said Tillman. Well, they do try and do that. Of course, if you had a finger on the pulse of your district and knew everybody there and they had your trust and you had theirs, then you would be able to change that in your district. Can you? No? Goodbye. You're about to lose the primary. The issues that resonate most with voters are not the issues that the DCCC is telling candidates to focus on. Then don't. Is he worried that even if he's successful in his campaign, that he's already betrayed one of the most powerful Democrats, making him an outsider as soon as he arrives in Washington? To a certain extent, people like Elizabeth Warren and people like Bernie Sanders have been ostracized by the party, although Bernie Sanders held himself outside of the party, once again. And they have been marginalized by the establishment to the extent that is possible, like being named ranking member of the Senate Budget Committee. That's pretty big ostracizing. Okay, but the fact of the matter is that the people are crying out for genuine leaders. I guess that's probably true. People like to say that about themselves. I'm crying out for one, sure. And the people who are crying out for a solution to inequality and systemic injustice, yeah. And to the extent that I am fighting for those solutions, then I think there will be a powerful constituency for that. I'm proud to be on the side of truth, he added. I'm proud to be on the right side of democracy, and I'm proud to be on the right side of free and fair elections. And we all like to feel that way. And good luck to you. Now we can turn to some of the other writings that have been offered up on Daily Kos and elsewhere that will address this point. One of which, by the way, I'll start with the tweet I read yesterday off the air from Dana Hooley, who I mentioned had made this comment. He, retweeting the Intercept's tweet about this very article, says... I guess the Intercept's tweet should be introduced here. The secretly taped audio reveals how senior Democratic officials have worked to crush competitive primaries and steer political resources to hand-picked candidates long before the party publicly announces a preference. And Dana puts it this way. Translation. Grandson and nephew of congressman decide... Is he a nephew of another one also? Because I thought they said... I remember that they said Tom Lantos. But, okay, grandson and nephew of congressman decides to run for Congress but has done no work locally to prepare. Outraised 5-1 by strong candidate, refuses to drop out, tapes Dem leader trying to get him to step aside, Intercept makes him a victim, Tulsi Gabbard endorses him. Well, all good points, but in the typical blunt style of Twitter and brash style of Dana, which is not always the best combination for soothing frayed nerves, but there you are. Seems to be true. Chris Reeves answers this way. DCCC comes under fire, but we need some real talk about how sausage gets made. And it's true. We always could use that talk. I tried to give that talk on internal process once you get here, but similar discussion. I don't mind discussing process on the way here either. And, it raises some instant objections. Well, why talk about sausage? We should be talking about quality cuts of meat. Yes, true. Now, What's actually being made here is sausage. So let's talk about that. Today, in a story at The Intercept, republished elsewhere, Lee Fang notes the working of elected officials and members of the DCCC involvement in primaries, in this case specifically, Colorado. We've seen this story before, and he points to Texas 7. We've seen this story before, repeatedly. Each and every time, we also run into issues where people are confused as to the Democratic hierarchy. I often point them to this incredible rundown by David Jarman in Daily Kos Elections, and I have that on standby for you. If we don't get there, it's linked. You'll get this link at the very least. In order to discuss the issue at hand, though, I wanted to write a short diary today, and there's no such thing, about the misconceptions of the role of party leadership on any front, and what the rank and file of the party really want. So, is this story the scandal that The Intercept makes it out to be? Should the DCCC be taken out and flogged? Are we doing the right thing? Let's take a look. The DCCC and state organizations should never tell a candidate to leave the race. I hear and see this argument frequently, not just at Daily Kos, but also in state meetings all over the country. What right does XYZ Executive Director, ED, have to say that I or anyone else shouldn't run for office? Before we get going down this road, I wanted to say that the party, in general, should work to stay neutral in most instances. A good primary benefits the voters, raises awareness, but also because taking sides can backfire. That having been said, the DCCC, state organizations, county leaders, and others also have a responsibility to be honest with candidates and let them know the lay of the race. When candidates enter crowded primaries, or when they first run for office, the party has a responsibility to say, this is what it will generally take to win in fundraising, time worked, voters contacted, money spent, etc. We also try to explain to candidates the difficulties they may face. In other words, saying, well, I'm an attorney and I understand the law, and I'm perturbed about XYZ issue. Plus, the incumbent Republican is a jerk and a traitor and a thief. Yeah. How are you going to win? I don't know. I haven't gotten that far. Well, you're going to raise this much money. You're going to need to contact this many voters. You should be out there already. You're 6 months behind. This is a problem. No, it's not. I understand this district. My neighbor the other day said, you should run for something. And sometimes it really is just like that. Well, your neighbor might be nuts, or he might be right, but he's just one person. Are you shoved out of the way at the farmer's market for carrots? Or does everybody say, hey, there's the guy, did they even remember you? You're the guy who was here for the carrots. That would be enough. All right, back to Chris here. Why do they do this? Because too often in the past, candidates were recruited into races, state and federal, with the idea that because they were a Democrat, the party would pay for their campaign and send donors straight to them. Because that's how it works, right? I guess people see movies or they just imagine that the party has lots of money. They're constantly raising all that money from corporations and fat cat donors. And the thing that they do with it is pass it out, right? Those candidates end up feeling burned, frustrated, and let down, in large part because no one had the discussion with them about what campaigns even look like. It is irresponsible to just shrug at candidates and say, I don't know, go for it. Recently, a candidate contacted me, running a primary campaign at a popular Democratic federal elected. What are we saying here? I don't even know what that means. A candidate contacted me running a primary campaign against a popular Democratic federal elected official. I pointed out, this is going to be an uphill race, and there are going to be a lot of people who will personally dislike you for trying to primary a Democratic elected official. While states like California work jungle primaries, as they call them, in many states it will be a one-on-one in the party, and you're likely to get crushed. You're free to run, and no one has the power to stop them, but if you do not explain to them the odds and the difficulties, are you really helping that candidate? There are also instances where candidates need to hear the advice, whether they follow it or not. You are not going to win a primary, or this could be personally damaging to you to run right now in some cases, or there are other offices you should run for instead. First, work your way up the ladder, right? In some cases, a candidate running for one race may be a better fit in another one. The party should be free to advise them of that without worrying about someone bashing people for giving candid advice. Good point. Next section here, the DCCC is terrible, picks terrible candidates, etc. The second main claim we hear in stories like those in The Intercept is that the DCCC is terrible, picks terrible candidates, makes terrible decisions, and so on. They will point back to recruited candidates who lost. They will argue that the DCCC has always had a record of a heavy boot and managed to muck up races. They certainly do argue that all the time. We have seen this from time to time too. We'll talk about it some more after this break. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, that are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue with our one and only subject. We are able to do these things on Friday, even if it isn't the advanced plan, but I had a feeling it might become that once we got into the story. The Warlock had this question from earlier on, by the way. Are you saying having details, that is to say detailed policy positions on your website, is a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not really sure. From what you said is the implied message here. And the answer is it's nothing. It's neither. It's a thing. It's a good thing. Having details on your website, fantastic thing. By itself, not much of a thing, one way or the other. If yard signs don't vote, neither do policy positions on your website. Do you need them? Do they do good things? Do they serve a purpose, have a function? Yes, but they don't vote. And can you win without them on there? You can. You might not in most cases, unless you have such a forceful personality or such a network behind you, or, such a tribal situation that no matter what happens, if you get the nomination, you're going to win because people are just going to vote tribally. It can be done. But what you can't do is say, my policy, they're so detailed. How is it that, millions of people in my district, or anywhere from 500,000 to several million, didn't look at my website, read it, and go, God damn it, I am persuaded by the force of this person's intellect. Jeebus Christmas. I can't wait to put the public trust in this person. Do you realize that this person has said very articulately that they are for combating climate change? This is astonishing. I can't wait. How much can you really do? When was the last time you read a candidate's web? There are people who do this. I don't. But then again, I've warned you a number of times. I don't listen to the State of the Union. Who cares? I don't. The rhetoric doesn't interest me. I'm somewhat interested in what your policy positions are to the extent that they differentiate you from anybody else. If they don't, F you. I got better things to do with my time. To be honest with you, you should put them there, but most people will never, ever see them. And if you sat down and forced them to look at it and made them read the policy positions, they'd come away saying, well, I don't know, I didn't understand any of that. So it's not a bad thing to have. It's just not the thing that you think it is. If you think you're going to win the campaign because look at my positions, maybe you should sit down with somebody who's won office and have a chat about how much that's going to do for you, so that you have a realistic idea of what there is ahead of you as a challenge, is what Chris Reeves was saying when we left off. We were discussing the oft-repeated point that the DCCC is terrible and can't pick anybody good. Chris continues here, while I won't disagree that DCCC has had some moments that are certainly doozies, and there are things I'm truly bothered by the DCCC that they do, the fact is the DCCC doesn't choose the candidate no matter how many stories tell you otherwise. The DCCC puts limited resources into tons of districts around the country, and if you want a nomination enough, then the people to appeal to are the voters in your districts. Win your primary, and the DCCC will generally come around to you in the general. Beat their candidate, you become the Democratic nominee. They don't hate you forever, unless, of course, you tape them and cry to the press a lot. Because, honestly, tape them and cry to the press a little bit and win, we want to win the seat. And by the way, that'll happen. And it happens from time to time anyway, without this story. And sure enough, people win the nomination and surpass the DCCC's favored candidate, or whoever, constituent members of the DCCC's favorite candidate. And they've said something on the record along the way, like, well, the Democratic Party, this just goes to show you the Democratic Party as an institution cares more about getting Jason Crow nominated than beating Mike Kaufman. And then you win the primary, and they don't stay out of it, and they back you, and they send you money, but it's less than you want. And then you lose, and then you're like, well, see, they sabotaged me because they were more interested in nominating. You just lost your election. You were there too, right? I mean, during this campaign, you were the candidate. You were there. You probably had more control over whether or not you win or lose the election than the DCCC does at that point. Don't you think, now that you're the general election candidate? Oh, yeah, they were working to undermine me. Secret things happened. Okay, sure. I mean, I can't say no, they didn't. After all, I'm pursuing the Trump-Russia story with vigor, so maybe they did. But I don't think that that's true in this case. The argument placed in these gives DCCC near superpowers to control primary voter outcomes. This just isn't reality. In Illinois, the DCCC, protecting an incumbent, got behind Dan Lipinski, while sites like Daily Kos supported Marie Newman. If the DCCC sticks with the wrong candidate, do not buy into the fact that the candidate is doomed. Just run a campaign and win. It is not impossible. Next section, DCCC does make big mistakes and is making them, but this is a distraction. The DCCC is going to make big mistakes. It will do so every cycle. So does the RCCC. They recruit candidates, both of them, and they are going to have some hits and some misses. It happens. There are going to be big mistakes made. And some lucky rolls of the dice that break our way that shouldn't. In good years, all sins are forgiven. In bad years, all sins are magnified. The problem is we focus too often on issues like this one because they are sensational and they will inflame, or in some cases move to depress our voters by making it seem as though the DCCC is the only organization making mistakes. We sometimes pass these mistakes on to other party entities as though there is a group dying every day to make mistakes. Look, even when I am very frustrated with the DCCC, for example, their current field planning, Chris says, I don't think for an instant that individuals are trying to do anything but win, period. Too much of our dialogue seemingly implies sinister motives. Anti-progressive, anti-X, pro-Y, or any other factor you can think of that doesn't involve winning. And again, remember other entities, the DNC, your state organization, your county organization, the DLCC, etc., have absolutely no, zero control over the DCCC. Now, how should the party deal with candidates? The party has a responsibility in many ways to recruit candidates. Many races sit dormant with no candidate at all if the party doesn't try to recruit. Now, once candidates are recruited, do we abandon them if someone else hops into the race? And that's an interesting thing, right? Suppose you have a incumbent Republican who has been secure in the seat for decades, and you can't recruit a candidate. No one wants to be the sacrificial lamb. Now, we hear plenty of stories where somebody jumps in and they're willing to be the sacrificial lamb, and then it turns out that the person is a Russian spy. The incumbent is a Russian spy, and lo and behold, the Democrat is elected. Lightning strikes, and everybody says, dang it, why didn't I run as I was once thinking of doing? But more to the point, you get a person who says, I'll do it. I'll be the sacrificial lamb. I'm just outraged about something, and somebody has to stand up for the party, and I just really feel like somebody needs to raise the banner. Our congressman, our Republican congressman, has been unopposed for the last 3 cycles. I will do it. Fantastic, the DCCC says. Whatever. I mean, they're probably not going to send a ton of money your way, but they are willing to say, okay, well, we'll give you some of the free or next to free, but valuable resources that we have to share with you, voter files, etc. Good luck to you. Thank you for stepping up. Conditions change. Donald Trump is president. He's horrific. More Democrats want to run for office. People are being encouraged all over the country. Get involved. Run for office. And somebody says, I understand there's already a candidate for office in our congressional district, but every year it's a sacrificial lamb. I could do better. I'm a veteran, whatever. I'm an entrepreneur. I started an engine company. I have a trust fund. I am nobody. I live in a working class neighborhood and I'm nobody, but I know everybody at the farmer's market, whatever. And maybe you're legitimately connected all over the place, a local hero, and you jump in the race, right? Now at that point, what if you're a better candidate? What if you are honestly better at everything and more likely to win? A neutral DCCC that doesn't involve itself in primaries says, I am now faced with a situation where I have shared a voter file with a candidate that I always thought was doomed to lose, but was willing to step up. 6 months ago, this person said, I'm in. We said, there's nobody else. We've been recruiting like mad here in the last couple of months since Trump has been such a disaster and we couldn't find anybody. But all of a sudden, somebody else shows up. So what do you do now? Do you then give the voter file to the second person in the interest of fairness? I'm not interfering in the primary. Do you say, honestly, this other person was a nobody, the first guy who got in, the second person is a local hero. This is exactly who you want. They're the most progressive person in the world, but everybody knows them and everybody loves them. This person actually has a great shot, not only at winning the primary, but winning the general election, given what's happened over the past few months. All right? So do we give them the same resources that we gave the other person and say that's neutrality? If I give them the resources that the other person also got, right? Everybody who's on board with, because they're a local hero, the progressive local hero says, yes, that is neutrality. You gave the first person the voter file, you got to give the second person the voter file. The first person, on the other hand, now says, wait a minute. When nobody was willing to run, I decided to step up. I was going to carry the banner. And you said, great, here's the voter file. And now I find out that some Johnny-come-lately is getting the same thing as me. Are you telling me you're trying to push me out of the race in favor? Are you trying to steer this race to the second person? I stood up when nobody else would. And that's a good point. That's very nice of you. I agree. I'm thankful that you did it. But we have found somebody better. No. I'm not putting my thumb on the scale. I'm doing exactly for them what I did for you. That is neutrality. Well, not from my perspective, it isn't. And that's the issue. Not from your perspective. It isn't. I don't know how to handle this one. I do know how to handle it. You give the voter file to the second guy. But the first person, he's got a base, even if it's only 6 people, and they now are like, oh, I was first in the race. I was willing to do it when no one else would. I was carrying the banner for the party when no one else was to be heard from. Now that it's a shoo-in, this guy comes from out of nowhere, and he's getting all the institutional support all of a sudden. Well, we gave you some too. Yeah, but not much. Well, we thought you were going to get crushed. That doesn't feel like a nonsensical position to me. All right, back to the article one more time. So what do we do? And as Chris puts it here, and it's not happening in every single race, but once candidates are recruited, do we abandon them if someone else hops in the race? What if it's a 3-way? What if it's a 5-way? At some point, do you just say, well, I'm going to help everybody? Or do you say, I don't have the resources necessarily to help all 5 of you, but I can help 1 of you or 2 of you even. How will I make that decision? Probably on the strength of their campaigns. Is that crazy? Chris continues, this is a question I posed to Tom Perez and Ben Lujan at recent party functions where we discussed Republicans' same-day switching, noting that if I knew the policy of the party was that we couldn't stay with candidates we recruited if they had a primary, Republicans would simply screw us by placing terrible candidates on our ballots. To that end, I pointed to this guy, Fred Phelps is pictured here, anti-gay bigot Fred Phelps, who, you guessed it, ran as a Democrat for governor. But even if you don't have someone as loony as Phelps, could underfunded, unprepared candidates be thrown into a race or encouraged to jump in only to sit and pillory candidates who had been recruited? Good question. It would certainly be a strategy worth implementing if we had it as a firm policy. The truth is, people read articles like those at The Intercept and they aren't mad that the party meddled. They are mad that the party didn't meddle in favor of their preferred candidate. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily what people would admit to as being the truth, but it is a theory. If they had meddled in favor of their preferred candidate, then they would be fine. And we do see that from time to time. In order to build a solid party for the future, these are the obligations the party leadership has. And according to him, these bullet points are: find, recruit, and develop solid candidates for the future. Support those candidates. Have honest conversations with all candidates entering races, whether we have a candidate or not, as to what will be expected of them, their realistic goals in their district, etc. And then lastly, of course, try to win. The Intercept story is interesting, and maybe we should work to recruit and get more great candidates. The motto at Daily Coast has been more and better Democratic electeds. DCCC will make mistakes. They can be called on it. State parties, too, can make mistakes. But I've never, not anywhere in the country, met anyone working in the party structure who ever said to me, I want to make sure we lose that race, so we're going to sabotage candidate A. That isn't what happens. Activists need to work to recruit, train, support, and develop better candidates at all levels in all districts. It is possible to be very critical of the DCCC's practices, methods, planning, operations, guidelines, approaches. I am all of those things. What does that even mean? Okay, I don't know, but maybe he's an important part of all those things. We can do that without seemingly. Maybe I am in agreement with all those things. We can do that without seemingly concocting the idea that informing a candidate with $90,000 cash on hand that he's unlikely to win against a candidate with $900,000 cash on hand. And to tell him that's an evil plot against the Democratic candidate. Tillman could win, and I don't know either of these candidates, but if someone didn't tell him at this point, this is going to be really uphill, and you're going to face difficulties, then the party would also be party to malpractice by failing to tell him the truth. All right. And I think that's largely true, and a factor you're going to have to bake into this cake here. I think a lot of good points were made. Now, that doesn't satisfy everyone, of course. And for instance, we have the top recommended diary from Subir, who likes to jump on this horse every once in a while, who says it this way: look, we're all mostly grown-ups here. We know how this works. We know what the DCCC and the DSCC and the DNC are about. So please spare us the sanctimony. And he quotes from Chris here that he said, when he says, the truth is people read articles like the one at The Intercept. They're not mad at the party meddled. They're mad that the party didn't meddle in favor of their preferred candidate. Well, he says BS to that. I want the party orgs to stay the F out of the primaries. Well, across the board, not a realistic position. Do you get involved in a primary in which there's one candidate? Do you get involved in a primary in which there was one candidate, but now there are two? Do you leave a primary in which a second person entered? Does the second person who enters it have to be a genuine, bona fide Democrat? Could it be somebody who you don't want on your ballot? Could it be the local Nazi who you just absolutely can't have? Can you weigh in favor of the other person, even if they're a corporate Democrat? If a Nazi enters the race, I don't know. But Subir wants you to know in the most strident possible terms, BS, stay the F out of the primaries. I don't want them putting a finger on the scale for anybody. Please stop explaining to me what my true motivations are and how I interpret news. While we're at it, spare us the cherry-picked straw men. And, for instance, I guess having a Nazi enter the race. Okay, then do nothing. Is that really, though, the position? Or is it really the case that, even Subir would say, well, okay, for a Nazi. Well, all right, then. We're inching a little bit closer to the idea that you're actually okay with it meddling in the primary when it suits you. But you said that was BS, but now it's kind of not so much BS. Or unless he's willing to say, no, I'm pro-Nazi running as well. Well, then I'm not with you. The race in question, Colorado 6, is one of the most promising pickups for Democrats in the country. Clinton won the district by 9 points, Obama by 5 points in 2012, and that's why the primary attracted multiple good candidates, he argues. If the candidate you recruited is at risk of losing a Democratic primary to a straight-up bigot who stands on the street corner holding up anti-gay signs, the Fred Phelps example, well, then maybe you should get out of the recruiting candidates business because you aren't very good at it. Of course, did they recruit him or did he say, I'm running? Well, then you should get out of the listening business when people tell you that they're running. Well, come on. Quite honestly, he's more interested here in the stridency of his rhetoric than actually doing anything. And not everybody can do what Chris Reeves did. But I've followed at a distance the diaries that Subir has offered in the past, and I don't recall him ever winning a seat in the Democratic National Committee, and so I'm not certain that his dedication reaches beyond diarying in strident fashion. But if that's what he has to contribute, that's what he has to contribute. It's not irrelevant. It's not nothing, but it's not what Chris has done, I can tell you that. There's more, of course, and you know what? Here I'm going to limit things, but I just wanted to at least put on the record that, I don't have to put it on the record. It's a top recommended diary. Lots of people saw it. Lots of people were interested in it. Lots of people are excited by it. But that's all I have for you at the moment. The conclusion here, in case you're angry at the DCCC, don't be. We are winning. They know it. We know it. Here's the crazy thing. The DCCC's favorite candidates know it too. That's why, he goes on to say, Jason Crow's healthcare blurb starts with the progressive mantra popularized by Bernie, healthcare is a right, not a privilege. Okay, so don't boo. Volunteer. And here are some candidates you can volunteer or give to. That's good, including Levi Tillman. Really, you should volunteer if you can. It counts for much more than dollars. All good advice. Hopefully Subir following it as well. What a horrible thing it is that conservadem Jason Crow begins his healthcare blurb with healthcare is a right, not a privilege. Obviously someone we have to work day and night, 24/7 to make sure they don't get anywhere near the Congress of the United States, unless, they do win and they vote our way, in which case, it would have been awesome if the other guy had been there to say the same thing. I don't know how you get to the point where, if there's a question about whether or not having a good blurb on your website is a good thing or a bad thing, and I understand the question, it's a good one. I don't know, and the answer is it's good to have those things. And then, of course, somebody puts one on there, and that's a good thing, right? And it even says that thing which you had hoped, against hope, the leading Democratic candidate in the race would say. But, for whatever reason, we're now invested in saying, yeah, but he's full of it. He's lying. He's only saying it because Bernie Sanders said it. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Why is it a bad thing if he's saying it because Bernie Sanders said it, but he's an insider, but the other guy who was the grandson of the congressman isn't an insider, he's an outsider, whatever, even though he's able to apparently tap into networks of venture capitalists to build a energy efficient engine company. Good. But can't raise dollars for a campaign. Bad. Questions about how that happens. Either you can raise money or you can't. Or if you can only raise money in one sector, maybe that's the sector for you. I'm not raising money in the political sector. It's not working for me. Am raising money in the energy efficient engine sector. Message from the invisible hand, perhaps, if you believe in things like that. Or maybe, Congress isn't the thing for me. What about that, right? I gotta join the resistance. We gotta stop Trump. Something has to be done. I'll run for Congress. My local congressman is a Republican and he's terrible. I'll run for Congress. I'm getting beaten. I might lose in this race for Congress. Do I die on the Hill here in the primary? Do I say, the other guy dropped out, Arnstead, he's still alive. He hasn't committed suicide, didn't jump off a bridge or anything. Do I run for mayor? Do I run for state assembly, state senate, county commissioner, school board, something like that? No, that's it. Screw it. I'm leaving. Now you have something to go to. You can run an energy efficient engine company, and that's great. And maybe you should. Or Maybe your ambition leads you elsewhere. Maybe lieutenant governor, like your maternal grandparents, whoever it was that did it. Maybe that's for you. Maybe higher office, the Senate. Run for I don't know, whatever it is. It doesn't work out this one particular office. Okay. Are you done there? I mean, really, honestly, like as people said about other candidates, you don't just necessarily jump in and say, president is the thing. It worked for Donald Trump, but, there might be other places you could go. Or you might help somebody else win this race. If you've got access to venture capital around the country, but they're not putting in for your, they don't want to turn you from the energy efficient engine entrepreneur into a member of Congress. That's not in our interest. We don't actually want to do that. We like you where you are. Just like I liked Bernie in the Senate, didn't want him to be president. I like you as an entrepreneur building energy efficient engines. Not so much necessarily for Congress. You would be great. Your positions are fantastic, but I do note that the other guy's positions are pretty good too. Well, he's only got good positions because Bernie Sanders told him to take those positions. And he listened? Well, we think he's faking it. Well, that's a judgment call, I would say, and maybe I disagree with your judgment. Anyway, I knew this would largely occupy the 2 hours because it could occupy 15 hours, to be honest. But it is the weekend, and sometimes I get carried away with stories like that. Sometimes it's a good thing to converse about over the weekend and use the fact that we have a commercial-free platform for 2 hours to discuss these things. You usually don't get that kind of conversation elsewhere about these things. Sometimes, though, I'm sad about the opportunity not to round up all the information we could bring you heading into the weekend. At least one other story I actually feel compelled to mention. You know how I round these things up and I say, this has got to be on the record. What about the gigantic turnout? How can you ignore this? The gigantic turnout in Arizona for the school teachers fighting for school funding. Laura Clausen didn't ignore it. That's her job, of course. So she put it on the front page of Daily Kos. Just wanted to send you off with this one. There was some amazing footage and still photos of the march of all the teachers dressed in red for ed, red for education. By the way, great organizing tip. I did see Natasha Chart passing that one on Twitter the other day. This is why you pick a color for your rally and stick with it. You can't get pictures like that without color coordination, to be honest. I mean, not everybody can tell the difference, but there's something to that. More than 50,000 people, students, teachers, parents, and community members turned out in Phoenix, Arizona Thursday to press the state government for increased education funding. If you're an Arizona lawmaker, this should be a sight to make you think long and hard about funding in future votes. Lots of great tweets sent out illustrating the size and depth of the turnout. And they're all here, and in particular the photo here actually from Fox 10 there. Matt Rodewald for Fox 10 has a fantastic aerial photo of the march. And again, great idea in organizing behind a color. It seems like a simple thing and seems like the sort of thing that, well, it's certainly dumber to concentrate on the color than it is. Shouldn't we have had a better blurb on our website? Well, in some cases, the visual impact is more important than the substantive impact. And, sometimes yard signs mean things too. All right, time to wrap things up. You know how I do it here. I waste lots of time going too far in depth on one story or another. Should be a hell of a weekend. The president is on a tear once again. One other story I guess I'll share with you, or two other stories. One that you should look at, of course, on your own, which is the storyline being developed by the New York Times. FBI letter casts further doubt on White House's Rob Porter timeline. It turns out that the Trump White House loves and protects scumbags because it is occupied and staffed by scumbags from top to bottom. Should come as no surprise to you, but as it turns out, they were lying through their teeth about everything they were doing to deal with Rob Porter. And, of course, here's a humorous piece that you might want to pick up in The Hill. Cohen, that is to say Michael Cohen, the guy in trouble with everybody in the world. Now, Cohen told associates he expected to be Trump's first chief of staff. How do you like that one? That's I picked it up from The Hill. They picked it up from where? Let's see. Who are they reporting over? The Wall Street Journal, which I also can't get. Apparently he thought he was going to be either the campaign chief, and then when he won, he figured he'd be chief of staff. And even Donald Trump was able to make that decision correctly and just give him a flat no. And now, of course, he'll flip and send him to prison. So wouldn't that be a fantastic follow-up? What's next on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? All the things I didn't get to today. How about this? Unable to out-talk her, Representative Anna Eshoo's sharp questioning of EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt highlighted just how corrupt he is. It was his day on in the barrel on the Hill yesterday. What else? Federal agencies cannot confirm the whereabouts of nearly 1,500 unaccompanied migrant children. Yikes. Trump literally threatened countries around the world voting over who will host the 2026 FIFA World Cup soccer games. That's a great story, too. We know all about FIFA and their level of corruption. He fits in terrific there. And the EU demands that online platforms and social networks crack down on fake news by October, or face the threat of stricter new laws imposed later.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
More stories here like this one. The DHS ends protected status for Nepalese immigrants, giving them 1 year to pack up and get the hell out. And the UK downgrades Trump's state visit after a year of humiliations. All that and more on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam next. We'll see you next week.